You think cooking without gas is hard? They cooked entire meals with nothing but dried camel dung, a handful of twigs, and the scorching desert sun. No forests, no coal mines, no endless supply of wood, just endless sand, relentless heat, and the kind of resourcefulness that turns scarcity into science. Picture this. You're standing in the middle of the Sahara. The nearest tree is 200 kilometers away. The ground beneath your feet burns at 65 degrees Celsius. The air shimmers with heat that could kill you in hours. And you need to cook dinner for your family. Not just tonight, but every night, for months of desert travel. What do you burn? What do you use? How do you create fire when there's nothing to fuel it? Most people would starve. But the Bedouins didn't just survive, they thrived. They created hot, nourishing meals that sustained entire families through the harshest conditions on Earth. Steaming rice that filled empty stomachs. Slow-cooked meat that melted off the bone. Fresh bread that rose perfectly in makeshift ovens. All of this in a place where a single piece of firewood was worth more than gold. In the vast deserts of Arabia, North Africa, and the Sinai Peninsula, trees were rarer than water. A dead branch was treasure. A fallen log was a family fortune. Yet the Bedouins didn't just survive on raw dates and warm milk. They maintained complex culinary traditions, preparing elaborate feasts for guests, brewing endless pots of tea, and baking bread daily. Their kitchens had no walls, no chimneys, no storage rooms full of firewood. But they had something more valuable. The knowledge that limitations don't prevent cooking, they inspire better cooking. This wasn't just about making do with less. This was thermal engineering, perfected over centuries of necessity. Every flame was precious. Every ember was calculated. Every cooking method was designed to extract maximum heat from minimum fuel. They understood heat transfer, thermal retention, and energy efficiency long before these became scientific disciplines. Their techniques were so effective that modern sustainable cooking enthusiasts are still trying to replicate them. The Bedouins turned the desert's greatest weakness, its absolute scarcity, into their greatest strength. They discovered that you don't need abundant fuel to cook well. You need smart fuel management. They found heat sources that others ignored, developed cooking methods that others never imagined, and created flavors that others couldn't achieve even with unlimited resources. In places where firewood was non-existent, they burned what was abundant. Where conventional ovens were impossible, they built thermal systems that worked better. Where most people saw only barren wasteland, they saw a kitchen with unlimited potential. The secret wasn't finding more fuel, it was using almost none at all. Their cooking fires were often no bigger than a candle flame, yet they produced enough heat to feed entire tribes. They could roast meat, bake bread, and boil water using fuel that could fit in your pocket. A cooking session that would require armloads of wood in a conventional kitchen needed only a handful of dried materials in Bedouin hands. But this efficiency came with rules. Rigid ones. Every piece of fuel was accounted for. Every flame was monitored. Every ember was nursed until it died naturally. Waste wasn't just inefficient. It was potentially deadly in a place where fuel determined whether you ate hot food or went hungry for days. They developed cooking schedules that maximized every heat source. Morning fires were planned the night before. Fuel was gathered and prepared days in advance. Cooking methods were chosen based on available materials, wind conditions, and ambient temperature. Nothing was left to chance because in the desert, chance could kill you. The result was a cuisine that was both incredibly resourceful and surprisingly sophisticated. Dishes that required hours of slow cooking, but used only minutes of actual fire. Breads that baked perfectly using residual heat. Stews that developed complex flavors through thermal techniques that modern chefs are still discovering. This wasn't primitive cooking, it was advanced cooking born from absolute necessity. The Bedouins understood that fire is just one form of heat, and heat can come from many sources. They learned to harness the sun, trap warmth in sand, and store thermal energy in clay vessels. They turned their environment into a kitchen, using every available resource to create nourishing, delicious food. In our modern world of gas stoves and electric ovens, we've forgotten these lessons. We assume cooking requires abundant energy, constant fuel, and modern conveniences. But the Bedouins prove that the opposite is true. The best cooking often comes from the greatest constraints. When you have everything, you learn nothing. When you have almost nothing, you learn everything. Their techniques weren't just about survival, they were about excellence. Bedouin hospitality was legendary throughout the Middle East. Travelers would detour hundreds of kilometers just to taste their food. Their coffee was considered the finest in the region. Their bread was sought after in markets across North Africa. All of this created with fuel sources that most people wouldn't even recognize as combustible. The desert was their teacher, and scarcity was their curriculum. Every day brought new lessons in efficiency, innovation, and resourcefulness. They learned that the best fuel isn't the most abundant. It's the most efficiently used. They discovered that limitations don't limit creativity, they inspire it. And they proved that when you truly understand heat, you can cook anything, anywhere, with almost nothing. When wood is scarce, you burn what's available. And in the desert, what's most available isn't pleasant to think about, but it's remarkably efficient: dried animal dung. This wasn't desperation. This was engineering disguised as desperation. Walk through any Bedouin camp and you'll see children with baskets, following behind camels, goats, and sheep. They're not playing games. They're fuel collectors, gathering the most important resource in the desert after water. Every dropping is examined. Every pellet is evaluated. Fresh dung goes into one pile. Partially dried goes into another. Fully cured, hard, odorless, and ready to burn, goes into the cooking supply. But this wasn't random scavenging. The Bedouins understood the science of combustion better than most modern engineers. They knew that fresh manure contains too much moisture. It produces heavy smoke, burns poorly, and wastes precious oxygen. Partially dried dung burns too quickly, creating brief flares that disappear before cooking anything. Only sun-baked pellets, aged for weeks in the desert heat, provided the slow, steady burn that efficient cooking requires. The transformation is remarkable. Fresh camel dung is wet, pungent, and completely unusable as fuel. But after 10 to 15 days of desert sun, it becomes something entirely different. The moisture evaporates completely. The organic matter compresses into dense, fibrous pellets. The smell disappears entirely. What emerges is a fuel source that burns cleaner and more efficiently than most wood. Research has shown that properly dried herbivore dung can reach temperatures of 800 degrees Celsius, hot enough for any cooking need. The high fiber content creates a slow, controlled burn that maintains consistent temperature for hours. Unlike wood, which flames up quickly and burns out, dung smolders steadily, giving cooks precise control over heat levels. A single pellet the size of a walnut can provide steady heat for 30 minutes or more. The Bedouins categorized their fuel like wine collectors categorize vintages. Camel dung was premium fuel. It burned the longest and hottest with minimal smoke. Goat pellets were good for quick cooking, burning hot and fast. Sheep droppings were ideal for warming food or brewing tea, providing gentle, sustained heat. Even the age of the animal mattered. Older animals produced denser, more efficient fuel. But even this abundant resource was rationed carefully. A typical Bedouin family used no more than what could fit in 2 cupped hands per day. Every piece was saved. Every ember was nursed. Every coal was reused until it crumbled to ash. Children learned to spot the best pellets from 50 meters away. Adults could estimate burn time by weight and density. Fuel management was a skill passed down through generations, as important as navigation or animal husbandry. They supplemented with whatever else the desert offered. Dried grasses were gathered during rare green seasons and stored for months. Thorny shrubs, common in some desert regions, were harvested and bundled into dense, slow-burning fuel sticks. Even dried dates were burned when food was plentiful. The high sugar content made them burn extremely hot, perfect for quick cooking tasks. Desert holly, a hardy shrub that grows in sandy soils, was particularly prized. Its woody stems burned almost like proper firewood, but were available in regions where trees never grew. Bedouins would travel days out of their way to harvest desert holly, cutting it into precise lengths and bundling it for transport. A camel could carry enough desert holly to fuel a family's cooking for a month. But the real innovation wasn't in gathering fuel, it was in needing so little of it. While European kitchens required constant fires and enormous wood consumption, Bedouin cooking was designed around fuel scarcity. Cooking methods that would require armloads of wood in a conventional kitchen needed only a handful of pellets in Bedouin hands. Fire management became an art form. Bedouins could nurse a small flame for hours, adding single pellets at precise intervals to maintain perfect cooking temperature. They understood airflow, oxygen supply, and heat distribution better than most trained chefs. A cooking fire that looked nearly dead to outsiders was actually perfectly controlled, providing exactly the right amount of heat for whatever was being prepared. Storage was equally sophisticated. Fuel was kept in specially woven baskets that allowed air circulation while preventing moisture absorption. The driest pellets were reserved for special occasions or emergencies. Medium-quality fuel was used for daily cooking. Lower-grade materials were used for warming or maintaining fires. Nothing was wasted because waste meant hunger. The efficiency was staggering. A European traveler in the 19th century noted that Bedouin families could cook elaborate meals using less fuel than it took him to light his pipe. They could maintain cooking fires for entire days using fuel that would barely start a fire in his home country. Their techniques extracted every possible calorie of heat from every scrap of available material. This wasn't just about making do with inferior fuel. It was about understanding that fuel efficiency matters more than fuel abundance. The Bedouins proved that you can cook anything with almost nothing if you understand heat management well enough. They turned the desert's waste products into the foundation of their cuisine, creating delicious, nourishing food using resources that most people would never consider combustible. The Bedouins discovered something modern science is just rediscovering. The sun is the most abundant heat source in the desert. Long before solar panels existed, they were solar cooking. And they did it better than most modern attempts. At noon in the Sahara, the sun delivers over 1,000 watts of energy per square meter. That's enough to power 10 light bulbs, or to cook a complete meal. The Bedouins understood this long before scientists measured solar radiation. They turned the desert's greatest threat into their greatest cooking tool. Black pots and pans weren't just traditional, they were strategic. Dark surfaces absorb more solar radiation than light ones, a principle that modern solar collectors still use. During the hottest hours of the day, when sitting in shade was the only safe option for humans, they'd place sealed pots of rice, lentils, or meat in direct sunlight. The black metal could reach temperatures above 70 degrees Celsius, slowly cooking stews and grains over several hours without any additional fuel. But simple solar heating was just the beginning. The Bedouins developed heat concentration techniques that could achieve temperatures rivaling conventional ovens. Polished metal bowls, shields, or even sheets of beaten copper were positioned to reflect additional sunlight onto cooking vessels. Multiple reflectors could focus enough solar energy to bring water to a rolling boil in direct sunlight. The physics were sophisticated, even if the materials were simple. Curved surfaces concentrate solar energy, creating focal points of intense heat. The Bedouins experimented with different angles, discovering that a properly positioned reflector could double or triple the effective temperature of solar cooking. They understood that time of day mattered. Morning and evening sun required different reflector angles than overhead noon sun. Windscreens were essential for solar cooking efficiency. Desert breezes that felt cooling to humans actually stole heat from cooking vessels, dramatically reducing cooking efficiency. The Bedouins built temporary windbreaks around their solar cooking areas using cloth, camel saddles, or stacked stones. These barriers created calm air pockets that allowed solar heat to accumulate around cooking pots. But their most ingenious technique was sand cooking, using the desert floor itself as a massive thermal battery. Hot desert sand, particularly in areas exposed to full sun, maintained temperatures of 60 to 80 degrees Celsius several centimeters below the surface. This heat persisted long after sunset, creating a natural slow cooker that operated around the clock. Sand cooking required specific techniques. Pots were wrapped in cloth or leather to prevent sand infiltration, then buried 20 to 30 centimeters deep in the hottest sand available. The surrounding sand acted like oven walls, providing even heat distribution that cooked food slowly and thoroughly. Meat became tender, grains absorbed flavors completely, and tough vegetables softened perfectly. The depth mattered enormously. Too shallow, and the pots would overheat on top while staying cool below. Too deep, and insufficient heat would reach the food. Experienced Bedouin cooks could determine optimal burial depth by testing sand temperature at different levels, using their hands to measure heat gradients that would require thermometers for modern cooks to detect. Clay pots were preferred for sand cooking because they distributed heat evenly and retained warmth long after being removed from the sand. The porous clay allowed moisture to escape gradually, concentrating flavors while preventing overcooking. Food cooked this way, slowly, at consistent low heat, was often more tender and flavorful than anything prepared over an open flame. Location selection was critical for sand cooking success. Sandy areas near rock formations retained heat longer than open sand. South-facing slopes received maximum solar exposure throughout the day. Areas with darker sand absorbed more heat than light-colored sand. The Bedouins could read desert terrain like a cookbook, identifying the best natural cooking zones by examining sand color, texture, and exposure patterns. Timing was equally important. Sand reached peak temperatures in mid-afternoon, making this the ideal time for burying cooking pots. But the residual heat lasted for hours, meaning dinner could be retrieved perfectly cooked just as the air temperature became comfortable for eating. This natural timing aligned solar cooking with daily rhythms, providing hot meals exactly when they were needed most. They even developed solar fermentation techniques. Clay vessels containing milk or grain mixtures were buried in warm sand for controlled periods, allowing beneficial bacteria to work at optimal temperatures. This produced yogurt, fermented grain porridges, and preserved foods that added variety to the desert diet while requiring no fuel whatsoever. Solar cooking wasn't limited to simple heating. The Bedouins discovered that different solar cooking methods produced different flavors and textures. Direct sun cooking created concentrated, intense flavors. Sand cooking produced gentle, even results. Reflector cooking allowed for precise temperature control. Each method had its place in Bedouin cuisine, creating a diverse cooking repertoire powered entirely by the sun. Modern solar cooking enthusiasts often struggle to achieve consistent results, but the Bedouins mastered these techniques through generations of practice. They understood that solar cooking requires patience, planning, and precise timing. But when done correctly, it produces food that's not just cooked, it's cooked better than conventional methods could achieve. The desert sun, which seemed like humanity's enemy, became their most reliable cooking partner. It never ran out of fuel, never needed to be gathered or stored, and provided consistent heat day after day. The Bedouins proved that the most abundant energy source was right overhead, waiting to be harnessed by anyone clever enough to capture it. When fire was absolutely necessary, every flame was engineered for maximum efficiency. Bedouin cooking methods focused on heat retention, quick cooking, and zero waste. They turned fire from a hungry consumer of fuel into a precisely controlled tool that could accomplish enormous tasks with minimal resources. The tandoor, a portable clay oven, was the centerpiece of their combustion technology. This dome-shaped vessel looked simple, but it represented centuries of thermal engineering refinement. The thick clay walls were designed to absorb intense heat rapidly, then release it slowly over many hours. A properly built tandoor could transform a brief, hot fire into an all-day cooking system. The process was ritual-like in its precision. First, a small but intensely hot fire was built inside the tandoor using the finest available fuel, usually dried wood or premium animal dung. This fire heated the clay walls to temperatures exceeding 400 degrees Celsius, hot enough to bake bread or roast meat. But the fire itself lasted only 30 to 45 minutes. Once the walls glowed with absorbed heat, the fire was allowed to die completely. Then the real cooking began. Bread was baked first, when the interior was hottest. Flatbreads could be slapped directly onto the glowing clay walls, where they baked in minutes. Thicker breads were placed on metal sheets or clay tiles inside the dome, where radiant heat cooked them evenly from all sides. The Bedouins could bake enough bread for several days using just one firing of the tandoor. As temperatures dropped slightly, rice dishes or stews were added. Large pots were sealed tightly and placed inside the cooling tandoor, where residual heat slowly cooked grains and tenderized meat over several hours. This method produced incredibly flavorful results because the gentle, even heat allowed ingredients to meld completely without burning or overcooking. Finally, as the tandoor cooled further, it became a warming oven for keeping food hot throughout the day. Prepared dishes could stay warm for 6 to 8 hours without additional fuel, ensuring hot meals were available whenever the family was ready to eat. A single firing could power an entire day's worth of cooking using only one small bundle of fuel. The construction of the tandoor itself was engineered for maximum thermal efficiency. The dome shape created optimal heat circulation, ensuring even temperature distribution. The thick walls provided massive thermal mass, storing heat energy for gradual release. Small air vents could be opened or closed to control airflow and heat retention. Every design element focused on capturing and conserving thermal energy. For quick cooking tasks, the Bedouins perfected the flash boil method. A small, intensely hot fire brought water or milk to a rapid boil within minutes. The moment boiling began, ingredients were added quickly, and the pot was immediately removed from the fire. The pot was then wrapped tightly in thick blankets, sheepskins, or buried in hot sand. The residual heat and insulation finished the cooking process without any additional fuel. This technique could cook rice, lentils, pasta, or vegetables using 70% less fuel than conventional methods. The key was understanding that most cooking doesn't require continuous heat. It requires sustained heat. By trapping the initial thermal energy and preventing its escape, the flash boil method accomplished full cooking with minimal fuel input. Pot selection was crucial for efficient cooking. Heavy-bottom vessels retained heat longer than thin pots. Tight-fitting lids were essential for preventing heat and moisture loss. Some Bedouin cooking pots had specially designed lids that could be weighted with stones, creating pressure cooker effects that reduced cooking times dramatically. Heat conservation extended to every aspect of cooking preparation. Cooking areas were carefully chosen and prepared to minimize heat loss. Wind screens made from cloth, leather, or stones protected flames from desert breezes that could steal precious thermal energy. Reflective surfaces were positioned to redirect radiant heat back toward cooking vessels rather than allowing it to escape into the surrounding air. The Bedouins developed cooking schedules that maximized thermal efficiency. Multiple dishes were prepared simultaneously, sharing heat sources and taking advantage of residual cooking temperatures. As one pot finished cooking, another took its place, using the remaining heat energy. Nothing was wasted because waste meant additional fuel consumption that the desert couldn't support. Fire management became a precise science. Experienced Bedouin cooks could maintain perfect cooking temperatures for hours by adding individual pieces of fuel at calculated intervals. They understood exactly how much heat different materials produced, how long various fuels burned, and how to combine different combustibles for optimal results. Airflow control was equally sophisticated. Small fires burn hotter and more efficiently than large ones, but only with proper oxygen supply. The Bedouins built cooking fires in shallow depressions that created natural draft effects, ensuring complete combustion of precious fuel. They used simple bellows made from goatskin to provide controlled air supply when needed. Even ash management was engineered for efficiency. Hot ash and coals were never discarded. They were transferred to specially designed containers where they continued providing low-level heat for warming food, heating water, or maintaining comfortable temperatures during cold desert nights. Every thermal calorie was extracted and utilized before finally being allowed to dissipate. The result was a cooking system that achieved maximum results with minimum fuel input. Bedouin families could prepare elaborate, multi-course meals using fuel quantities that wouldn't be sufficient to boil water in conventional kitchens. They proved that cooking excellence doesn't require fuel abundance. It requires thermal intelligence, precise technique, and absolute respect for the energy contained in every flame.